Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Chapter 61, The Serpent Eye Zombie King. The zombie was ridiculously fat. Its arms and legs were layered with rolls of fat, stacked one on top of the other, making it look just like the Michelin Man from those tire commercials. Let's just call him Michelin for now. Justin quickly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. We're here to talk about a deal. If it works out, I promise you'll get plenty of benefits. Benefits? Are benefits something you can eat? Michelin tilted his head, his expression blank. Clearly, he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. With intelligence like that, there was no way he could be the ruler of the 5-star zombie nest. Michelin was just a grunt, a brute force tank, the zombie equivalent of a bulldozer from Ethan's territory. Justin froze for a moment, realizing this too. So, he wasn't the one in charge of the 5-star zombie nest. Humans, follow me, Michelin said in a deep, rumbling voice. Then he turned and started walking ahead. With every step, his rolls of fat jiggled and wobbled like jelly. Justin and Mark exchanged a glance before quickly following behind him. The whole way, the two of them were on edge, their nerves stretched thin. Even though the zombie hadn't shown any signs of hostility, zombies were unpredictable and violent by nature. Who knew if, in the next second, it might decide to rip them apart and drink their blood? Thankfully, they didn't encounter any other zombies along the way. But the air grew colder and colder, and a metallic stench lingered in their noses. On the trees lining the street, something seemed to be writhing. Justin squinted to get a better look, and when he realized what it was, he gasped sharply. Thick, mottled pythons, as wide as a person's arm, were coiled around the branches, flicking their tongues and baring razor-sharp fangs. Just looking at them sent shivers down his spine. Damn, there are so many snakes, Justin muttered, noticing that nearly every tree had one, or several. Overwhelmed with fear, he decided to just look away. Out of sight, out of mind. Still, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. The fact that there were so many snakes in the heart of the 5-star zombie nest made him suspect that the zombie king here had some kind of strange power. It might even be a phantom infected. After what felt like an eternity, they finally arrived in front of a building. The glass doors were shattered, and the metal doorframe was wrapped in several massive pythons. Their bodies were as thick as a grown man's waist, their heads as large as lanterns, and their glowing yellow eyes radiated malice. The giant snakes raised their heads, sizing up the guests who had arrived. Their long tongues flicked in and out, as if they were ready to strike at any moment. What the hell is this? A snake pit? Justin muttered, his skin crawling. Michelin, however, remained polite. Please come in. Justin's face darkened. His fear was palpable, but he couldn't help muttering under his breath. Damn it. Cursed boss, cursed corporate greed. Justin, are you scared? Mark asked in a trembling voice, hoping for some reassurance. Gulp. Justin swallowed hard, forcing himself to act tough. Scared? Of what? We're already here. No turning back now. Pull yourself together. We're representing the company's reputation. Explore more at Empire. Oh, Mark wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. The two of them cautiously approached the door. Thankfully, as they passed the giant pythons, the snakes didn't attack. They simply turned their heads to follow the pair with their unblinking eyes, watching as they entered the building. Phew! Justin was just about to let out a sigh of relief when the sight inside the building made his hair stand on end. His breath caught in his throat, and his entire body began to tremble uncontrollably. The entire lobby was filled with snakes. They were everywhere, coiled together, slithering over one another, writhing in massive, tangled piles. The sheer number of them was enough to make anyone's skin crawl. The air was thick with the stench of blood and decay, so strong it made Justin gag. Ugh! Justin fought the urge to vomit, forcing it back down. His fear reached its peak. His whole body shook like a leaf, and he felt a pressure in his bladder, as if he might wet himself at any moment. Mark, equally terrified, didn't want to linger in this place any longer. Seeing Justin frozen in place, he urged him forward. "Justin, hurry up. Why, you're going to have to help me walk." Justin stammered, his legs like jelly. Mark was speechless, but had no choice. The two of them leaned on each other for support, carefully stepping over the snakes as they made their way through the lobby. Their hearts were pounding so hard it felt like they might burst out of their chests. Justin couldn't help but think that, aside from his boss's schemes, this was the most terrifying ordeal of his life. Time seemed to lose all meaning. It felt like both a single second and an eternity had passed as they made their way forward. Finally, they made it through the snake pit and entered the inner hall. Roar! The familiar sound of zombie growls echoed around them. One terrifying face after another emerged from the shadows. These weren't ordinary zombies. They were elite ones, the equivalent of a personal guard. At the forefront of this group sat a towering figure. His skin was deathly pale, almost ash-white, but it showed no signs of decay. His facial features were surprisingly handsome, though the area around his eyes was crisscrossed with bulging black veins, giving him a sinister and unsettling appearance. But the most terrifying thing about him was his eyes. They were a piercing yellow, with slit-like pupils, serpent eyes, identical to the snakes outside. Hiss! Justin felt a chill run down his spine. His body froze, and a sudden warmth spread in his pants. He had wet himself out of sheer terror. "Master, this human is kind of cute," said a woman standing beside the serpent-eye zombie king. She wasn't fully human, though. Her upper body was that of a woman, but her lower half was a grotesque spider's abdomen, supported by 8 razor-sharp legs that gleamed like steel blades. She was a fusion of a zombie and a giant tarantula, her bloated abdomen twitching slightly as she spoke. The woman licked the corner of her mouth with a long, slimy tongue, her gaze lingering on Justin with a disturbing curiosity. "Damn it!" Justin cursed silently, frozen in place, not daring to move a muscle. The serpent-eyed zombie king finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, like the sound of rusted metal scraping together. "Come, sit. Okay." Justin stammered, hesitating for a moment before forcing himself to move. His legs felt like jelly as he shuffled forward, and when he reached the chair, he noticed that it, too, was surrounded by snakes. Once again, he cursed inwardly. "Damn boss. Damn corporate greed. Sending me to negotiate with a zombie king? This is worse than death." Suppressing his disgust and fear, Justin reluctantly sat down. Almost immediately, the snakes coiled around his legs, their cold, scaly bodies pressing against his skin. It felt like they could bite him at any moment and end his life. Justin's mind went blank. Out of habit, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cigarette. His hands were trembling so badly, though, that it took him several tries to get it into his mouth. When he finally managed, he fumbled with his lighter, his shaking hands making it impossible to strike a flame. He tried again and again, but the lighter kept going out. The serpent-eyed zombie king watched him for a moment, then reached out and took the lighter from Justin's hand. With a simple flick, the flame came to life. Thank you," Justin stammered, taking a deep drag from the cigarette. The rush of nicotine helped calm his nerves, if only slightly. "So, what do you want to talk about?" the serpent-eyed zombie king asked, his tone cold and indifferent. "Well," Justin hesitated, trying to steady his voice. "We're from Genesis Biotech. A while back, one of our shipments, some experimental serums, crashed in your territory. Do you still have it?" The serpent-eyed zombie king nodded at first, but then his expression darkened. "Yes, it crashed here, but..." His voice grew colder. "The zombie king from the skyscraper district stole it. He killed one of my best lieutenants and over 1,000 of my men." "What? Him again?" Justin muttered, frowning as he processed this new information. Things weren't going as he had expected. Looks like the boss's analysis was wrong. "What did you just say?" the serpent-eyed zombie king asked, his tone sharp. "And nothing. Nothing at all." Justin quickly waved his hands, his nerves getting the better of him. His hands trembled even more violently now. I mean, that zombie king is just too much. He dared to kill your men. We should team up and wipe them out completely. Justin explained hastily, trying to justify himself. The Serpent-Eyed Zombie King had already been thinking along those lines. Someone coming into his territory to kill and loot, then leaving as if nothing happened? That was just plain arrogant. But previously, he hadn't acted recklessly because he didn't know enough about the other side situation. Do you know anything about their zombie nest? Yes, I do. Justin nodded repeatedly and continued. According to the intel my company gathered, he commanded a horde of 10,000 zombies, with 2,000 elite troops. And now, with the addition of the X-Virus, their numbers have increased by at least 500. Those terrifying zombies have eaten a lot of our people. It started with 200 at the prison, another 200 at the mall, and then the Operation King Hunt Squad, including 500 armed personnel. Because of that, their evolution level is insanely high. In fact, most of the city's major battles were led by him. You could say he's undefeated and unstoppable. Oh, the Serpent-Eyed Zombie King nodded, starting to piece things together. So what you're saying is, you've lost to him 3 times in a row? Technically, yes, Justin admitted awkwardly. But that's only because they ambushed us. During the Operation King Hunt mission, we ran into the red-faced Zombie King first, and he ended up reaping all the benefits. The Serpent-Eyed Zombie King knew about the red-faced Zombie King. In fact, they'd even crossed paths before. He had originally planned to recruit him, but Ethan had killed him and taken over his territory instead. Master, the fact that Redface got hunted down just proves how stupid he was, said the spider zombie woman arrogantly from the side. She herself had once been a powerful ruler, stronger than the red-faced Zombie King. But later, she was subdued by the Serpent-Eyed Zombie King, and their forces had merged into one. Now, they commanded a total of 30,000 zombies, including a significant number of elite troops. Even though they have a lot of elite zombies, we can make up for it with sheer numbers. Besides, I've got my little treasures. The Serpent-Eyed Zombie King reached down to stroke the snake coiled beneath his chair. The snake flicked its crimson tongue and hissed, its demeanor radiating excitement. Justin wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, thinking to himself, this guy is seriously twisted. But then, something suddenly came to mind. Oh, right, that Zombie King is often surrounded by a flock of crows. They're pretty strong, too, so we can't underestimate them. The crows flying over the city? The spider zombie woman's predatory eyes gleamed, and a wicked smile crept across her lips. As a hybrid of a human and a giant tarantula, she was practically a natural predator of all birds. They scatter the moment they see me. Leave them to me. All right. The Serpent-Eyed Zombie King nodded, calculating his odds. From the looks of it, victory was almost guaranteed. And with Genesis Biotech backing him, there was no reason he could lose. In fact, he was already planning to turn on Genesis Biotech after using them. Once they were out of the picture, he would become the undisputed ruler of the Central region. Looks like it's time to expand my territory. Meanwhile, on the other side, Ethan's underlings were feasting on the 4 members of the Black Hand Legion. One zombie gnawed on an arm, another on a leg, and 2 others fought over a head, tearing into it together. This is way too little meat. Ethan frowned, realizing it wasn't nearly enough to feed his men. His 500 elite zombies had evolved to such a high degree that their appetites had grown significantly. The meat from just 4 people? It wasn't even enough to fill their teeth. Why didn't Ryan bring more people? Ethan felt a pang of regret. As his gaze swept the area, he noticed a phone lying on the ground. Its screen was lit up, displaying messages from a group chat. The phone had fallen from Ryan's pocket. If he won't call for reinforcements, I'll do it for him. Read exclusive content at Empire. Ethan picked up the phone and started scrolling through the messages. Sure enough, it was a group chat from members of the Black Hand Legion who were actively discussing things. Hey guys, how's it going today? Anyone find anything interesting? Yeah, I found a bunch of survivors out in the eastern suburbs. So much fun, haha. The city's too densely populated. Most people have already turned into zombies. But if you head out to the suburbs or the countryside, you might still find some living ones. Any hot guys? Send me a few. They need to be 6 feet, 7 inches, have abs, and, be well endowed. What the hell? You should have told me earlier. I already killed all the men. Want them dead. Just cut off their dicks and bring them back. I'm collecting 1,000 of them, and I'm only halfway there. No. I'm not touching that. You come here and do it yourself. Before the apocalypse, the Black Hand Legion had already been active on the dark web. They were known for their bloodlust, cruelty, and twisted fetishes. They often killed people in horrifying ways just for fun, recording videos to share with others. Ethan read through their chat, a faint smirk curling at the corner of his lips. From the chat logs, Ethan learned that there was a small Black Hand Legion outpost not far from his location. It was in an underground mall, stocked with plenty of supplies. The outpost housed over 20 Black Hand Legion members, who were living like kings. They had over 100 survivors imprisoned there, treating them as livestock, and were enjoying a life of luxury and indulgence. Living the good life, Ethan muttered to himself. He couldn't stand seeing others doing well, so he decided to take his men and raid their outpost. But just as he was about to act, a private message popped up on Ryan Brooks' phone. It was a distress signal. Bro, I ran into something near the museum. I'm in serious danger right now. You gotta come save me. Bring people from the shelter if you have to. Just tell them I'm a regular survivor. Ethan glanced at the sender's name, Jason Brooks. The connection to Ryan was obvious. Something near the museum? Ethan thought for a moment. The museum wasn't in his territory, but it wasn't far either. How could there be something like that near my territory? What did you see? Ethan replied, I don't know. It's something that comes and goes like a ghost. It's almost invisible, like it can blend into the surroundings. It's already killed 4 of us. Invisible? Comes and goes like a ghost. Ethan frowned. He had never encountered anything like that near his territory. Could it have wandered in from somewhere else? Maybe I should check it out. Can't leave something like that lurking around. Bro, please hurry. I feel like it's getting closer to me. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Jason's messages became increasingly frantic. He was clearly terrified, on the verge of a complete breakdown. Whatever he had encountered must have been truly horrifying. All right, just hang in there. Ethan sent a message of encouragement, though what he really meant was, don't die yet. Wait until I get there, then you can die. I am coming to save you right now. Ethan turned to Bulldozer and the others, giving them a quick order. I'm heading out for a bit. Keep an eye on things here. Things might get a little chaotic soon. Don't worry, boss, Bulldozer replied with a goofy grin. The next moment, they watched as Ethan's figure gradually disappeared into the distance, vanishing around the corner of the street. Bulldozer stared in the direction Ethan had gone, a hint of admiration in his eyes. The boss had just brought back a load of food, and now he was heading out again to hunt. His heart swelled with gratitude. Man, he's really something else. After leaving the territory, Ethan activated his stealth mode, silent and unseen. He moved like a ghost through the wrecked streets, not disturbing so much as a blade of grass. A short while later, he arrived at the museum district. Something felt off. He could sense it. A cold wind swept through, carrying the faint metallic tang of blood. Above the museum, dark clouds loomed, black as ink, pressing so low they seemed to almost crush the roof. The oppressive atmosphere was suffocating. Boom! Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the clouds as thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind picked up, howling like a chorus of wailing spirits. Dust and debris swirled through the air, plastic bags fluttering like restless ghosts. Ethan's sharp eyes locked onto the museum ahead. The massive building loomed like a slumbering beast. Bloodstains were splattered across the ground outside, and the corpses of zombies lay scattered around. The eerie silence was almost deafening, a stillness that felt like death itself. But Ethan could sense it. 3 humans were still alive inside. They were hiding, their fear practically radiating off them. As for what was threatening them, Ethan couldn't quite pinpoint it. That alone was unsettling. What the hell is it? he muttered to himself. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, activating his domain of the dead ability to phase straight through the museum walls. Inside, the dim light made the atmosphere even more oppressive. Occasionally, a flash of lightning would illuminate the space, casting fleeting shadows across the room. Ethan scanned his surroundings. The place was a mess: shattered glass, dried blood, and decayed corpses reduced to little more than skeletons. These were the remnants of the chaos from the early days of the apocalypse. The museum had been packed with people back then, making it one of the hardest-hit areas. The bloody handprints smeared across the walls told a story of desperation and terror. Ethan pressed on, moving toward the faint traces of life he could sense. It didn't take long. In a dimly lit hallway, 3 figures came into view, panting heavily as they ran. "Hurry up. I think it's catching up to us," one of them shouted. "Jason, I swear it's just toying with us," another said, his face tense. "Like a cat playing with a mouse." Jason tried to reassure them. "Don't worry. My brother said hold on. He's coming to save us." "When's your brother Ryan getting here?" the third person asked, their voice trembling. "Probably soon, I think," Jason replied, clinging to the sliver of hope that had kept him going this far. What Jason didn't know, though, was that Ryan was gone. His body had been torn apart, his remains now fused with the very zombies they were running from. The 3 of them reached the end of the hallway. Ahead was a door leading into a large room. With no other options, they pushed it open and rushed inside. The room was massive, at least 2,000 square feet, but it felt eerily empty. Paintings hung on the walls, though many had fallen to the floor. Their frames were shattered, glass shards scattered everywhere, glinting faintly in the dim light. "No way out," a dark-skinned young man exclaimed, his voice tinged with panic. "Shoo!" Jason quickly raised a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. "Don't make a sound. Let's hide." The 2 companions nodded and huddled into a corner, pressing their backs against the wall. The solid surface gave them a false sense of security, as if it could shield them from whatever was out there. What they didn't know was that Ethan was already there, concealed within the very wall behind them, silently observing the trio. But he wasn't planning to act just yet. Stay updated through Empire. Killing them would be effortless, but that wasn't his priority. The real concern was the thing lurking in the museum. And now Ethan could feel it. Ever since the 3 had entered this empty room, a faint presence had begun to approach. It was elusive, almost intangible, as if it wasn't entirely of this world. Could it really be a ghost? In the apocalypse, there had been countless inexplicable phenomena, but Ethan had never encountered an actual spirit. Crack! A sudden flash of lightning split the sky, its blinding light flooding the room for a brief moment. Jason's unease deepened. His instinct screamed that death was closing in. He pulled out his phone and frantically sent another message. "Bro, where are you? I'm out of options here." But no reply came. "Fuck." Jason cursed under his breath, his frustration boiling over. Still, he trusted his brother. They had relied on each other since they were kids. Ryan would come for him. He had to. Suddenly, a strange sensation crept over him, like a cold hand gripping his heart. Jason's eyes darted to the paintings on the walls. His gaze shifted rapidly from one to the next until it landed on something that made his stomach drop. One painting stood out, a portrait of a black figure. Its face was pitch black, like coal, with no discernible features. Only its mouth, filled with sharp fangs, and its eyes, radiating a menacing aura, were visible. It looked like a demon straight out of hell. "Hey, you two, look at that painting. Doesn't it seem off?" Jason whispered urgently, nudging his companions. The 2 looked at him in confusion before following his gaze. "Which one are you talking about?" "The one in the middle. I don't see anything weird," one of them said, frowning. "Yeah, me neither," the other added, shaking his head. Jason's frustration flared. "Are you blind?" "It's right." He stopped mid-sentence, his words catching in his throat. The painting was gone. His eyes widened in disbelief. The portrait he had seen had vanished. One of his companions spoke hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jason, the middle one, that's a window." Crack! Another bolt of lightning lit up the room, illuminating everything in stark detail. Jason's heart nearly stopped. Where the painting had been, there was indeed a window, and something had been looking at him through it. Holy shit! A wave of terror surged through him, sending chills racing up his spine. His entire body broke out in goosebumps as a cold sweat drenched him. "I saw it. I saw it. Run!" Jason bolted, sprinting back toward the hallway like a man possessed. "Huh? Saw what?" His two companions were bewildered, but seeing Jason's panic, they didn't dare stay behind. They scrambled after him, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty room. But then, a shadow slipped through the crack in the window. It moved like liquid darkness, merging seamlessly with the surrounding gloom. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a predator, something born of nightmares. The shadow darted forward, its speed inhuman, closing the distance in an instant. Before they could react, it reached the last person in the group. Schlunk! A clawed hand, wreathed in black flames, pierced through the man's back. Warm blood sprayed out, splattering across Jason and the other companions' necks and hair. Ah! The two froze in terror, their bodies trembling as they turned to look. Behind them stood a towering figure cloaked in darkness. Its clawed hand was embedded in their friend's back, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. The victim wasn't dead yet. His legs kicked weakly, his bloodshot eyes bulging as he struggled to speak. "Help! What the hell is that thing?" Ryan and Jason were utterly horrified. The shadowy figure tossed the corpse aside, then extended a dark purple tongue to lick the crimson blood off its claws. Its bloodlust was palpable. It was a B-plus class zombie king, with the awakened ability Shadow Veil, which allowed it to hide in shadows and move through tiny gaps like window cracks, door crevices, or even fissures in walls. While in its Shadow Veil state, it could also evade detection, making its ability particularly eerie and unpredictable. Not bad, Ethan silently mused to himself. Killing it to harvest its crystal core seemed like a waste. It might be better to recruit it as a subordinate. After all, manpower was in short supply these days. With that thought, Ethan stepped out from the wall, his figure slowly materializing. The moment Ethan appeared, the shadowy figure immediately sensed his presence. It whipped its head around, its fierce eyes locking onto him. Although its face was as black as charred coal, making its expression unreadable, the shock it felt was unmistakable. Ryan and Jason, on the other hand, were completely dumbfounded. They had just witnessed Ethan materialize out of thin air, and their minds were reeling. What the hell is going on today? First monsters, now this guy just pops out of nowhere. The shadowy figure grew visibly wary. Ignoring Ryan and Jason entirely, it focused all its attention on Ethan. A deep sense of unease crept into its mind, a primal instinct warning it that this man was dangerous. "Who are you?" "I'm the zombie king of this building. You have two choices. Submit to me or face the consequences," Ethan said bluntly. The shadow shook its head. "I know you're strong, but I will never submit to anyone." "Oh." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this little shadow's defiance. It seemed like this one had some backbone. In truth, the shadow was also a zombie king, ruling over a territory on the far side of Serpentine's domain. It had once commanded over 10,000 subordinates, but after several clashes with Serpentine, its forces had dwindled to just 5,000. Serpentine had also tried to recruit the shadow, but it had refused to yield, leading to a bitter conflict between the two. The shadow was no match for Serpentine and had suffered defeat after defeat. At one point, it was even driven out of its territory entirely. However, through guerrilla tactics and sheer determination, it managed to reclaim half of its land with its remaining forces. Its Shadow Veil ability made it incredibly hard to kill, and Serpentine eventually gave up trying. But life in its diminished territory was tough. Other zombies could at least scavenge rats or insects for food when supplies ran low. The Shadow's territory, however, was so small that even rats and bugs were scarce. Catching 3 flies was considered a feast. So, it had no choice but to rely on its shadow veil ability to roam far and wide in search of prey. "If I want to leave, there's no way you can stop me," the shadow said confidently. "Want to bet?" Ethan asked with a smirk. Without another word, the shadow's body began to blur, as if engulfed in black flames. Its form dissolved into a liquid-like state, slipping into its shadow veil mode. Like a pool of dark fluid, it moved swiftly across the ground, darting into a nearby wall crack. At the same time, Ethan's figure vanished from where he stood. The shadow moved silently, like a ghost, slipping through walls, door cracks, and window gaps. It twisted and turned through the building, moving so erratically that even it began to lose track of its direction. Finally, it emerged in a room, stepping out of its shadow veil state. Its charred body rose from the ground, solidifying once more. Phew! The shadow glanced back in the direction it had come from. Seeing no sign of pursuit, it let out a long sigh of relief. It had heard of Ethan before, rumors of how he had killed Bone Spike, one of Serpentine's top lieutenants. His strength was no joke. "Damn it, I finally found some prey, and now it's gone. My brothers back home are still waiting for food." "Gone? I wouldn't say that. Stay connected via Empire." Suddenly, a voice rang out behind the shadow. The shadow froze in shock and spun around, only to see Ethan standing there. His tall, lean figure was dressed in a spotless white shirt, and a faint smile played on his lips. "Ew, how did you get here?" "I followed you, of course," Ethan replied casually, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The shadow was stunned. It hadn't sensed anyone following it earlier, yet here Ethan was appearing out of thin air. It was downright eerie. How is this possible? Could it be an illusion? The shadow tried to make sense of the situation, but its instincts screamed danger. Without hesitation, its body began to blur and dissolve again, slipping back into its shadow veil state to escape. But just as it was about to flee, Ethan's eyes flashed with a crimson glow. In an instant, a powerful domain of the dead unfolded around him. The oppressive force surged forward like a tidal wave, engulfing the shadow completely. Damn it! The shadow's liquid-like form rippled violently under the crushing pressure, as if it were carrying the weight of a mountain. It couldn't move. Ethan's voice rang out, calm but commanding. "Submit." "Never." The shadow growled through gritted teeth, its defiance unshaken. "I'd rather die than bow to anyone." "Oh." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. Then, to the shadow's surprise, he suddenly withdrew the domain of the dead. The suffocating pressure vanished in an instant, and the terrifying aura around Ethan dissipated, leaving him looking calm and unbothered once more. The dimly lit room fell silent again, the tension easing. Then, with a casual wave of his hand, Ethan pulled out half a slab of beef from his spatial storage ring. If intimidation didn't work, maybe temptation would. "How about this? Does this change your mind?" The shadow froze, its gaze locked onto the beef. In the apocalypse, beef was an incredibly rare delicacy. For zombies, it was even better than human flesh, more flavorful and packed with energy. In the shadow's barren territory, even rats and bugs were hard to come by. Now, faced with a slab of fresh, juicy beef, it couldn't resist. Unbidden, tears of hunger and longing dripped from the corners of its mouth. Ethan chuckled softly at the sight and tossed the beef over. "No need to answer right away. Take this back with you and think it over. Follow me, and there'll be plenty more where that came from." "All right, fine." The shadow picked up the beef and couldn't help but take a huge bite. Delicious. Absolutely delicious. Without another word, it turned and left, clutching the beef tightly. Meanwhile, back in the museum, 2 humans were still alive, Jason and his companion. Both were trembling with fear after witnessing the terrifying zombies earlier. "Jason, we need to get out of here now." Jason's companion urged him, desperate to escape while Ethan and the shadow were gone. "Yeah." Jason nodded, his legs shaking as he started running down the long hallway. But deep down, he knew the truth. After seeing the zombies' horrifying abilities, their chances of escape were slim. His only hope was to contact his brother, Ryan. As they ran, Jason pulled out his phone and frantically sent messages to Ryan, praying for a miracle. Their hurried footsteps echoed through the empty corridor as they sprinted toward the museum's main entrance. The closer they got, the more it felt like salvation was within reach. If they could just make it outside, maybe, just maybe, they have a chance. But then, a tall figure slowly materialized in front of the entrance. Ethan's cold, piercing gaze fell on them. "Stop!" Jason's companions screamed in terror, and both of them skidded to a halt. He was here. The overwhelming fear returned, suffocating them. Death loomed closer with every passing second. Jason's hands trembled as he glanced down at his phone, hoping for a reply from his brother. But there was nothing. "Don't bother." Ethan's voice broke the silence as he casually tossed something toward Jason. It landed with a clatter at his feet, a phone. The screen was still lit, displaying all the frantic messages Jason had sent. Jason's eyes widened in horror. "That's my brother's phone?" A terrible realization dawned on him. "What did you do to him? Where's my brother?" Ethan's smile was cold and unfeeling. "Your brother? Oh, he's around, in pieces, scattered everywhere." Jason understood what Ethan meant, and his heart sank into utter despair. His most trusted brother had already been torn apart and devoured by zombies. What a hopeless, crushing apocalypse this was. In that moment, tears of grievance, rage, and pain welled up in Jason's eyes and spilled over. "Stop crying. I'll take you to see your brother right now," Ethan said casually, his tone indifferent. He began walking toward the two of them. With each step, the domain of the dead unfurled, its oppressive force sweeping over them like a tidal wave, erasing them almost instantly. Meanwhile, Shadow returned to his barren territory, carrying a slab of beef. But on the way back, he couldn't resist taking bites out of it. One bite turned into another, and every time he told himself, "This is the last one." By the time he reached his territory, half the beef was gone, leaving only scraps and edges. Still, his ragtag group of brothers in arms was astonished. "Beef? Is this real beef? Boss, where'd you get this? Did you hunt down a mutant beast?" Read new chapters at Empire. "No, the zombie king from the skyscraper gave it to me," Shadow replied honestly. Oh, hearing this, his men were even more shocked. The zombie king had meat, but didn't eat it himself, and gave to their boss instead? Was there really such a generous zombie in this apocalypse? "Boss, I think that zombie king's not bad. Should we? I don't know. Repay the favor." Shadow nodded thoughtfully, already mulling it over in his mind. "Maybe it's time we settle the score with Serpent Eye once and for all." Roar! At the mention of Serpent Eye, his men let out a collective growl, their hatred palpable. "Boss, I've been saying forever that we should just go to war with them." "Don't rush it. We'll take our time with this," Shadow said, his mind already forming a plan. He figured he could team up with Ethan to take down Serpent Eye and finally get revenge for being driven out of his old territory. One of his elite zombie followers spoke up. "I'll follow your lead, boss. Just tell us what to do. Wait for the right moment. When the time comes, just watch for my signal," Shadow said, deep in thought. The elite zombie glanced at Shadow's face, which was as black as charcoal, and suddenly remembered how their last battle had ended in disaster, because no one could read Shadow's expressions. Elsewhere, inside a museum, Ethan was busy collecting a few corpses. But instead of heading back to his own territory, he decided to make the most of his trip and gather more supplies. That's when he remembered the small outpost of the Black Hand Legion. Killing humans, Ethan thought, was far more entertaining than killing zombies. Humans were brimming with emotions. They could feel fear, sadness, and despair. Zombies, even the evolved ones, had emotions that were far more muted in comparison. How should he savor this delightful torment? Leaving the museum, Ethan followed the intel he'd gathered on his phone and soon arrived at a plaza. The area was eerily quiet, with no zombies in sight. Bloodstains and rotting corpses littered the ground, and the surrounding buildings were in ruins, a desolate wasteland as far as the eye could see. But Ethan could already sense it. There were humans hiding nearby. They were right beneath his feet. Instead of using the underground entrance, which was guarded by an awakener, Ethan activated his domain of the dead and slipped through the ground itself, silently infiltrating the underground mall. The world went dark for a moment before his vision returned. Ethan found himself in a spacious room. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals. Looking around, he saw wooden shelves lined with rows of transparent glass jars. Inside the jars, floating in formalin, were various preserved specimens. What the hell is this? Ethan stepped closer to take a look and realized that the jars were filled with men's severed dicks. What the? He couldn't help but curse inwardly. The Black Hand Legion really lives up to its reputation. What kind of sick hobby is this? These guys are seriously twisted. Scanning the room, Ethan counted at least 100 jars, each containing the same grotesque contents. Not a single one's big, he muttered under his breath. Just then, the sound of clinking chains reached his ears, accompanied by the faint groans of men in pain. At the far right corner of the room, 2 men were hanging naked, their arms and legs spread wide and bound to wooden frames with iron chains. On a nearby table lay an assortment of knives and jars. Ethan didn't need to think too hard to figure out what had happened. The 2 men had clearly been subjected to castration. Blood dripped from their mutilated groins, and their faces were twisted in agony. Ethan walked straight toward them. He didn't bother concealing himself. His figure materialized in full view. The 2 men, who had been drifting in and out of consciousness from the pain, suddenly perked up when they saw him. One of them, his voice weak and trembling, called out, "Brother, how did you get in here? Please help us." "Who's your brother?" Ethan replied casually. "Bad news for you. Your dick's already gone." The man froze, speechless. He hadn't expected to be mocked at a time like this. "Just get me out of here, please. If that crazy woman sees you, she'll find a way to make your dick stand up, just so she can chop it off. She's not human. She's a monster." "Well, I'm not human either," Ethan said flatly, clearly uninterested in continuing the conversation. He pulled out a dagger and plunged it into the man's neck. Blood spurted out in a violent gush, and the man's body convulsed a few times before going still. "If that crazy woman cuts off what's below, I'll just cut off what's above. Isn't that much kinder?" The other man's eyes widened in terror as he watched. Help. Somebody help. He's killing people." But in this place, screams like that were so common that no one paid them any attention. "It's the end of the world. What's the big deal about killing someone?" Ethan said nonchalantly. With a flick of his wrist, the second man's cries were silenced. Afterward, Ethan calmly stored the 2 corpses in his spatial storage ring. With that done, he closed his eyes and focused on sensing the life forms in the underground mall. There were still over 90 humans alive in the area. Some were survivors who had been tortured to death's door, while others were members of the Black Hand Legion who were currently out on patrol. But just then, Ethan sensed someone approaching the room, a presence stronger than the others. Moments later, the door creaked open, and in walked the person the 2 men had referred to as the crazy woman. She had long, jet black hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. Her figure was curvaceous, with an hourglass shape that was impossible to ignore. She was dressed in a revealing outfit that left little to the imagination. The woman's eyes locked onto Ethan, and for a moment, she froze, her expression one of surprise. But that surprise quickly morphed into something else, an infatuated, almost obsessive look. "Well, aren't you a handsome one?" Since the apocalypse began, this woman, known as the Crazy Woman or Demoness by others, had never seen a man as attractive as Ethan. Not only was he strikingly handsome, but he was also clean and well-groomed, a rarity in this hellish world. To her, he was nothing short of a treasure. Where did he come from? She wondered. Did one of the guys bring him in as a gift? If so, they really know how to please me. "Don't be scared. Handsome," she said in a sweet, seductive voice, her eyes brimming with a dangerous allure. Her tone was soft and enchanting, carrying a hypnotic quality that could easily ensnare the weak-willed. Ethan immediately recognized her for what she was, a mental type awakener. He knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone cold and distant. The woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she nodded slightly, her gaze growing even more sultry. Her eyes were locked onto Ethan, as if she were a predator stalking her prey. She swayed her long legs as she walked toward him, her movements slow and deliberate, like a cat toying with its catch. "There are places where sunlight doesn't reach," she murmured, her voice dripping with suggestion. "But you could light them up." Ethan guessed to himself that the place this woman was talking about must be inside her own head. As she approached, her seductive aura grew even stronger, her psychic energy pushed to its absolute limit. But to her surprise, Ethan remained completely unaffected. His eyes stayed as clear and calm as a still lake. "What's going on?" "Seriously, not even a little reaction?" she muttered, her tone laced with frustration. But before she could process it further, Ethan's domain of the dead unfolded in an instant, spreading rapidly and engulfing her. A crushing pressure descended like a tidal wave. The woman froze, her body stiffening as her eyes widened in shock. The flirtatious smirk she wore just moments ago twisted in a sheer terror. "You?" she stammered. "What's wrong? Weren't you having fun just now?" Ethan's voice was calm, almost indifferent, as he raised his dagger and drove it straight toward her head. Her pupils shrank to pinpricks as realization dawned. This guy isn't human. She immediately tried to fight back with her psychic energy, but Ethan's domain of the dead was far too overwhelming. Before she could even release her power, it was forced back into her skull, compressed like a bullet misfiring in the chamber. Read New Adventures at Empire. The sensation was excruciating. A piercing scream tore from her throat as her brain felt like it was being stabbed with needles. But the scream didn't last long. Ethan's dagger flicked inside her skull, and with a swift motion, he extracted something that looked like a fresh, glistening cherry. Her lifeless body collapsed, and with a practiced efficiency, Ethan stored it away. The woman's scream was sharp and carried far, loud enough to reach the ears of two Black Hand Legion members patrolling outside. But instead of rushing to investigate, the two men just chuckled, exchanging knowing looks. "Damn, sounds like she's really going wild this time," one of them said with a smirk. "Yeah, she's probably having the time of her life," the other replied, grinning. "Wonder whose dick she's chopping off this time." She doesn't just cut them off. She keeps them as trophies." The two burst into laughter, their crude banter echoing as they strolled past the door. They didn't notice when, moments later, Ethan slipped out of the room like a ghost, silent and unseen. Ethan could sense the presence of Black Hand Legion members in the rooms on either side of the hallway. In the room to the right was a small-time leader of the group, a man named Bruno Morgan. His nickname was Bear, and it fit him perfectly. He was massive, hairy, and brutish like a grizzly. Inside, Bruno was surrounded by 4 female survivors. He was sucking on the breasts of 2 women at once, his hands groping another woman's clitoris, while his thick, oversized dick was pounding into the last woman, who was bent over in front of him. "Oh, Bruno, I knew it. I knew I was your favorite." The woman he was thrusting into moaned, her face flushed with pleasure. "Bullshit. Bruno loves me the most. He makes me feel so good," another woman snapped, glaring at her. The remaining 2 women weren't having it either. They pressed their nipples against Bruno's face, shaking them aggressively. "You're all just jealous. Bruno liked us first." The 4 women began bickering, their voices rising as they fought for his attention. But their jealousy wasn't born out of love. Bruno had abused and tormented them so much that they developed Stockholm Syndrome, their twisted affection a result of his cruelty. "Ha ha ha!" Bruno roared with laughter, thoroughly enjoying the chaos. Watching the women fight over him filled him with a sick sense of satisfaction. Not long ago, the Black Hand Legion had been nothing more than a band of outlaws, hunted like rats and forced to operate in the shadows of the dark web. But now things had changed. They were living like kings in the apocalypse, indulging in every depraved fantasy. For Bruno, the end of the world wasn't hell, it was paradise. Ethan didn't choose to attack Bruno right away. Instead, he turned and slipped into the room on the left. The moment he entered, the heavy stench of alcohol hit him like a wall. The room reeked of booze, and the sound of loud, thunderous snoring filled the air. Empty bottles were scattered all over the floor, and on the bed lay a large, overweight man, passed out cold. His snores were so loud they could have been mistaken for a chainsaw, and every exhale reeked of alcohol. He was completely out of it, sprawled across the bed like a bloated corpse. A drunk, Ethan muttered to himself, wrinkling his nose. The man was so soaked in alcohol that Ethan couldn't help but think of him as marinated meat, like bourbon-soaked ribs or whiskey-glazed steak, the kind you'd savor at a backyard barbecue. Ethan smirked at the thought. At least he's done half the work for me. Prepping himself like this? That's the kind of initiative I can appreciate. Ethan stepped forward without hesitation, effortlessly extracting the crystal core from the drunkard's body. With a flick of his hand, the corpse vanished into his spatial storage ring. In this small outpost of the Black Hand Legion, some were addicted to alcohol, while others were consumed by lust. Ethan continued walking. The room next door was where the survivors were being held. From there, he could sense the faint presence of dozens of living people. As he entered, a foul stench of urine and feces assaulted his nose. The room was a small, dimly lit warehouse, packed with dozens of humans. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow. Some leaned weakly against the walls, while others lay sprawled on the ground. The oppressive atmosphere of the sealed space was suffocating, filled with a deathly silence. But soon, a few of the captives noticed Ethan's presence. Their first reaction was to shrink back instinctively, too terrified to approach him. They saw his clean, unblemished clothes and immediately assumed he was part of the Black Hand Legion. Please don't kill me. Let me go, I'm begging you. I'll do anything you want. Just let me out of here. Please, just a bite of food. I'm starving to death. I'll join you. I'll be cannon fodder if I have to. Long live the Black Hand Legion. A few of them dropped to their knees, men and women alike, bowing repeatedly, their minds on the verge of collapse. Ethan stared at them coldly for a moment before suddenly nodding. All right, huh? The group froze, exchanging bewildered glances. They couldn't believe what they'd just heard. Did he really agree? Ethan waved his hand, and a bag of sausages appeared. There were 10 in total. This. Dozens of pairs of eyes locked onto the bag, their mouths watering uncontrollably. The overwhelming hunger gnawed at their sanity, pushing them to the brink of losing control. Although the underground mall had supplies, the Black Hand Legion never shared any with the captives. These people had been starved to their limits, surviving purely on willpower. A moment of weakness, and they'd collapse. Now, seeing the sausages, their eyes lit up with a ravenous green glow. But before anyone could move, Ethan flipped his hand again, revealing a sharp knife in his palm. Without a word, he tossed both the bag of sausages and the knife onto the ground. Ethan was curious. In such a desperate situation, would starving people choose the knife or the sausages? It was a question of human nature. At first, no one even noticed the knife. Like wild dogs, they lunged at the sausages. 3 or 5 of them, their faces twisted with desperation, tore open the packaging and stuffed the sausages into their mouths. Even as they ate, their hands kept grabbing for more, fighting off anyone who got too close. Get your hands off me, you bastard. Please, don't take it. Just give me one. Back off. It's mine. The warehouse descended into chaos. Cries, curses, and screams filled the air as dozens of people pushed and shoved, clawing their way toward the food. Ethan crossed his arms and watched, a faint sense of detachment in his gaze. For a moment, he thought there wasn't much difference between humans and zombies. One woman managed to grab a sausage and shove it in her mouth, only to have a man rip it away from her. He kicked her hard, sending her sprawling to the edge of the crowd. Some even dropped to the ground, licking up the crumbs and scraps of sausage that had fallen. There were over 50 survivors in the warehouse, but only 10 sausages. It was nowhere near enough. As the last of the sausages were being devoured by a few individuals, those on the outskirts grew increasingly desperate, yet they could do nothing. That's when a woman, standing on the edge of the chaos, turned her head and noticed something lying quietly on the ground not far away, a sharp knife. She froze for a moment, her breathing growing heavier. The cold glint of the blade reflected in her eyes, which suddenly burned with a crimson light. Die, all of you. The woman forced out her words through clenched teeth, her face twisted with rage. She picked up the sharp knife from the ground and lunged at the crowd, driving it into a man's neck. Blood sprayed everywhere, splattering across her face. The rush of adrenaline hit her like a drug. The suffocating confinement, the humiliation of being tormented, and all the pent-up negativity inside her erupted like a volcano in that moment. She lost all sense of reason, completely consumed by madness. Without hesitation, she began stabbing wildly at the people in front of her. The dimly lit warehouse was instantly filled with screams of agony. In mere seconds, she had taken down 5 or 6 people. One man felt a sudden chill in his abdomen, followed by a sharp, searing pain. "You bitch! You dare stab me? I'll kill you," he roared. He grabbed her wrists with both hands, wrestled the knife away from her, and, gripping the handle tightly, plunged it into her chest 4 or 5 times in quick succession. The woman let out a blood-curdling scream before collapsing into a pool of her own blood. Blood dripped steadily from the knife's tip. The man, his eyes now bloodshot with rage, turned to see someone else grabbing for the pack of sausages. "Die," he snarled. Like a rabid dog, he charged at the crowd, stabbing indiscriminately. More screams echoed through the warehouse as others fell. Realizing the man was a threat, the remaining people scrambled to wrest the knife from him. What had started as a fight over sausages had now devolved into a battle for weapons that are rarely rational creatures. When their interests are threatened, or when they're consumed by despair and anger, they lose all sense of reason. It's as if they're possessed, with only one thought left in their minds: kill the others. Some even began fighting each other over scraps of food, clawing at throats, gouging out eyes. The chaos spiraled into a full-blown massacre. The warehouse descended into utter madness. Screams of pain, curses, and roars of rage filled the air as one person after another fell. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, blood pooling and flowing like rivers. The air grew thick with a metallic tang, the stench of blood so strong it was suffocating. It was like a slaughterhouse. Ethan stood at a distance, his pristine white shirt untouched, watching it all unfold. Before long, fewer than 10 people were left alive in the warehouse. Most of them were gravely injured, lying on the ground, barely clinging to life. Only one man still had some strength left. Crawling through the blood, he gritted his teeth and dragged himself forward. With trembling hands, he reached for half a sausage lying on the ground. Ignoring the blood smeared all over it, he shoved it into his mouth. Ha! His bloodied face twisted into a grotesque smile, his eyes narrowing in satisfaction. He looked utterly deranged, his mind shattered by everything he had just endured. Ethan decided it was time to end this farce. He began walking toward the survivors, ready to grant them release from their suffering. But the commotion inside the warehouse had drawn the attention of the patrol outside. What the hell's going on in there? Are they fighting again? Damn it, these 2-legged sheep just can't behave, can they? Let them starve to death. Grumbling and cursing, the 2 patrolmen made their way toward the warehouse. However, the moment they opened the door, their expressions froze. Even the ruthless members of the Black Hand Legion couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines. The sight before them was horrifying. Over 50 bodies lay sprawled across the floor, blood soaking every inch of the ground. The air was thick with the stench of death. And amidst the carnage stood a lone figure, tall and composed, dressed in a spotless white shirt. His cold, piercing eyes locked onto theirs. The scene was utterly surreal, a vision of pure terror. What the fuck? The two men stared, completely petrified, their fear palpable. A wave of icy dread washed over them, sending shivers down their spines. It felt as though a tiger had wandered into their sheep pen, and they had walked in at the worst possible moment. With all the survivors now dead, Ethan's identity was no longer in question. Quick, go find Bruno. The two patrolmen, realizing they were no match for him, turned to flee. But in the next instant, an overwhelming pressure descended upon them, like a mountain crashing down, pinning them in place. Their legs trembled uncontrollably, as if they were stuck in quicksand, unable to move an inch. There's no need. I'll go find him myself. Ethan's deep, magnetic voice echoed in their ears. Before they could react, their consciousness faded, and they collapsed to the ground like puppets with their strings cut. Two more bodies joined the pile. With a casual wave of his hand, Ethan gathered up all the corpses and blood, as if tidying up a room. Then, as if taking a leisurely stroll, he made his way toward the final room. At that moment, Bruno was still in the middle of an intense session with four women. "Bruno, I'm hungry," one of the women said coyly, her voice dripping with seduction. "All right, I'll cook some pasta for you later," Bruno replied with a grin, clearly enjoying himself. But suddenly, he felt something was off. It was as if a pair of eyes were watching him. Uneasy, he instinctively glanced toward the door. "What the hell?" Bruno let out a startled yell. Standing in the doorway was a young man, staring directly at him. Ethan's sudden appearance had shaken Bruno to his core. His entire body froze for a moment, and his confidence faltered. When did you get in here?" Bruno stammered, his voice tinged with... Quickly regaining his composure, he jumped out of bed, cursing loudly. "Who the hell are you? A new recruit? You think you can just barge in here without saying a word?" Bruno was a strength-type awakener with weak sensory abilities. Even though chaos had erupted outside, he hadn't noticed a thing, too preoccupied with his activities. Your next chapter awaits on Empire. Ethan didn't respond. His gaze shifted downward, briefly glancing at Bruno's exposed body. Then, with a faint smirk, he said, "So small. What did you just say?" Bruno's eyes widened in fury, his face turning red with rage. "You're dead." Even the four women behind him were outraged. "Who is this guy? How dare he interrupt us while we're with Bruno?" "Exactly. And he insulted Bruno too. Doesn't he know Bruno's the boss around here? He's as good as dead." "Yeah, Bruno will take care of him, and then we can get back to having fun." The women, clearly suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, had become infatuated with Bruno despite their circumstances. But before they could finish their complaints, Bruno had already charged at Ethan. His massive, muscular frame moved with the speed and ferocity of a raging bear. However, just as Bruno was about to reach Ethan, his body froze mid-stride. His legs began to tremble violently, his eyes bulging in shock. The arrogance on his face vanished, replaced by sheer terror. "What's wrong, Bruno? Hurry up and teach him a lesson." "Yeah, show him who's boss. Once you're done with him, we can pick up where we left off." The women's voices were filled with impatience, completely oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. But in the next moment, Bruno's trembling grew worse. Unable to withstand the crushing pressure of Ethan's domain of the dead, his knees buckled, and with a loud thud, he collapsed to the ground. "Huh?" The four women froze, their expressions filled with confusion. What was going on? Bruno was kneeling? That was their usual position, not his. Bruno, on the other hand, was overwhelmed with fear. He finally understood the sheer terror of the man standing before him. Known for his incredible physical strength, Bruno prided himself on his resilience, yet he couldn't even get close to Ethan. "Rhea!" With a desperate roar, Bruno activated his trump card. His ability allowed him to enter a berserk state, temporarily enhancing his physical strength. However, it came with a steep price, severe exhaustion that left him bedridden for an entire day after use. His muscles swelled grotesquely, veins bulging across his body like writhing snakes. Blood visibly coursed through them, giving him an almost monstrous appearance. Fueled by his berserk state, Bruno forced himself to stand within the oppressive domain of the dead. Summoning every ounce of strength, he lunged to the side, crashing through the wall to escape the room. Boom! The wall crumbled as Bruno burst into the hallway, desperate to put distance between himself and Ethan, hoping to escape the range of the domain. Bruno was no weakling. As a B-plus rank awakener, he wasn't someone who could be instantly crushed by Ethan's aura alone. His neck veins bulged as he shouted frantically, "Help! Somebody help me! Stop yelling, you hillbilly! While you were busy having your fun, I already dealt with your little buddy." Ethan slowly stepped out of the room. Bruno glanced around, his eyes darting in every direction. The place was eerily empty, completely silent, not a single soul in sight. Everyone dead? A wave of pure terror washed over him. He had killed them all, silently, without a trace. Not even the bodies remained, as if they had vanished into thin air. It was beyond unsettling. It was horrifying. "I'll kill you," Bruno roared, summoning every ounce of rage he had left. His massive, bear-like frame charged straight at Ethan. His movements were powerful, his momentum unstoppable, but there was a tragic futility to it, like a moth flying straight into a flame. It was the desperate charge of a warrior making his final stand. Bruno poured all his anger, fear, and despair into his fist, aiming a devastating punch at Ethan's face. Ethan, however, remained calm. With a slight tilt of his body, he effortlessly dodged the blow. Then, with a casual flick of his hand, he struck the back of Bruno's head. The move seemed almost lazy, but it was precise. In that instant, Ethan extracted Bruno's crystal core. Bruno's body went limp as he lost consciousness. His momentum carried him forward, and he collapsed to the ground, sliding nearly 20 feet before coming to a stop. His once massive, hulking form began to shrink rapidly, reverting to its original size. His body withered, deflated, and became frail, lifeless. Bruno, four women rushed forward from the shadows, their faces filled with grief. One of them even dropped to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Wake up, Bruno. Don't leave us. We can't live without you. Please, please don't go." Their emotions were raw, twisted, and utterly broken. They had fallen in love with the man who had abused and tormented them, a sick, almost supernatural attachment. In another life, before the apocalypse, these women might have been students, professionals, or loving wives and mothers. They could have lived quiet, peaceful lives, raising families and growing old in comfort. But now, everything had changed. Ethan's domain of the dead expanded, enveloping the four women. It freed their warped souls from the chains of their unnatural obsession. Ethan felt a small sense of satisfaction. "Guess I did another good deed," he thought to himself. With that, the underground mall fell completely silent. Not a single survivor remained. Ethan began wandering through the mall, casually looting supplies. There was plenty to take: food, toiletries, and other essentials, all of which he stored in his spatial storage ring. Among the items, he found a list. It detailed the names of the Black Hand Legion members stationed at this base. There were 20 names in total, but Ethan knew he hadn't killed that many. Some of them must have been out scavenging for supplies or hunting down survivors. Ethan's mind wandered. He figured there were probably others, like Ryan, who had infiltrated official shelters and were lying low. He snapped a photo of the list and sent it to Mia. Stay tuned for updates on Empire. It didn't take long for her to reply. "What's this supposed to mean?" Mia asked bluntly. "These are all members of the Black Hand Legion," Ethan explained. Mia didn't waste words. She simply replied, "Thanks. Don't mention it. Consider it a freebie," Ethan texted back. After gathering everything useful, Ethan returned to his territory. With a wave of his hand, he dumped out the feast he had collected. He even poured some sauce over it for good measure. A pile of corpses tumbled onto the street, forming a grotesque mountain of bodies. The smell quickly drew his subordinates, including Bulldozer, who came sniffing the air like a bloodhound. To them, the scene was like Thanksgiving dinner, turkey drenched in gravy, ready to be devoured. "Holy crap! Look at all this. Boss, you're incredible. How'd you manage to catch so many? The group was in awe. Bulldozer, in particular, was stunned. The city was overrun with zombies now, and finding even a single survivor was nearly impossible. Yet somehow, Ethan had managed to bring back so many, and with such variety, too. There were barbecue ribs dripping in sauce, and Thanksgiving turkey drowned in gravy. Without hesitation, they began to feast, tearing into the bodies with ravenous hunger. The desolate street was a scene straight out of nightmare. Corpses feasting on other corpses, the sound of flesh being torn apart echoing through the air. Upstairs, Nina, a part-time worker, was cleaning the windows. Even though she'd been here for almost 2 months, the sight outside still filled her with dread, her stomach churning with nausea. And then she noticed something. The clothes Ethan had changed out of today reeked of blood, far more than usual. It was obvious. Ethan had been killing more than ever. As night fell, darkness blanketed the city. In the pitch-black apocalypse, the growls and roars of the undead never ceased. Tonight, though, there were new, eerie sounds mixed in, unidentifiable and unsettling. No one knew what they were, because as the apocalypse dragged on, everything, humans, zombies, mutated beasts, even plants, was evolving in unpredictable ways. At any moment, something strange and monstrous could appear. Survival of the fittest. Kill or be killed. That was the law of the apocalypse. If you wanted to live, you had to keep killing. And as time went on, the violence only escalated. Ethan soaked in the bath, changed into clean clothes, and swallowed 2 crystal cores. Then he poured himself a glass of juice in a tall wine glass, sipping it leisurely. He stayed holed up in his spotless, orderly home, feeling a rare sense of peace. The energy from the crystal cores and blood was being absorbed into his body, making him stronger by the minute. In fact, Ethan was starting to feel like he'd surpassed the limits of the official refuge's power rankings and even the classifications set by Genesis Biotech. The strongest awakeners he'd encountered so far, like Michael from the Operation King Hunt Squad or Bruno from the Black Hand Legion, were only B+ level. But against him, they didn't stand a chance. Of course, Mia from the official refuge was an exception. If her pain threshold ever hit 100%, it was hard to imagine what she could become. Her awakening ability was a rare talent, almost like a stroke of luck. Still, even Mia had her limits. If she faced someone with an overwhelming power gap, no amount of awakening ability would save her. And besides, combat wasn't just about raw stats. There were countless other factors at play. It wasn't unheard of for the weak to defeat the strong. Take real life, for example. There are cases of rats killing cats, or a grown man throwing a punch, twisting his ankle mid-swing, falling, and cracking his head on a rock, only to lose to a kid. So, despite Ethan's immense strength, he remained cautious. If he encountered an enemy, he'd kill them without hesitation, leaving no room for them to become a threat. At that moment, outside on the street, a shadow moved silently, blending seamlessly into the darkness. It crept closer to Ethan's territory, undetected. It was Little Shadow, the neighbor of Serpent Eye. Earlier today, while passing through Serpent Eye's territory, he'd noticed something unusual and decided to pay Ethan a visit. He also had an idea, to team up with Ethan and take Serpent Eye down. But first, he needed to figure out how strong Ethan's forces were, how many elite fighters and skilled warriors he had. He wanted to scope things out. After all, as the saying goes, know your enemy, and you'll never lose a battle. Little Shadow prowled through the darkness, moving stealthily. Before long, he heard a strange, chilling laugh. It was Laura. She must have eaten her fill today because she seemed to be in a good mood. Her laughter echoed through the pitch-black night, sounding far more unsettling than any cry. Damn it, Little Shadow cursed under his breath. Even as someone used to danger, he could feel an overwhelming sense of menace radiating from her, even more than from the zombies. Pretty strong. As Little Shadow kept moving forward, he grew more and more surprised. Some of the elite zombie troops were wandering around, each one radiating a powerful and ferocious aura. At one point, a zombie passed right by him, sniffing the air. It seemed to sense something unusual and almost discovered him. What a sharp nose. Little Shadow muttered to himself, feeling uneasy. If his stealth skills got exposed and Ethan's crew found out, it'd be beyond embarrassing. It'd be a total disaster. Just as he was about to move on, a voice called out from behind him. "Stop right there." Little Shadow turned his head and saw a zombie with unusually clear eyes. It was obvious this one wasn't your average mindless undead. It had intelligence. In fact, it was none other than one of Ethan's 3 generals, the PhD zombie. The PhD zombie, with his awakened psychic abilities, had already locked onto Little Shadow. His sharp senses had detected the intruder. Before Little Shadow could react, a group of elite zombies came rushing over. Among them was Laura, her movements ghostly and swift, and the hulking bulldozer, whose massive frame made him look like a walking tank. The air grew tense as the zombies surrounded Little Shadow, their killing intent palpable. He'd been caught. Little Shadow felt like he'd been slapped in the face by fate. Worse still, Ethan's zombies were undeniably strong. There was no way he could fight his way out of this. "Don't panic. I'm on your side," he quickly blurted out, terrified that if he hesitated even a second, they'd tear him apart and eat him alive. Bulldozer stared at him, his curiosity piqued. Where'd this big black rat come from?" I'm not a rat." Little Shadow immediately dropped his shadow form, revealing his true body, jet black, like a lump of coal. "My name's Shadow. You can just call me Little Shadow." Bulldozer squinted at him, still full of curiosity. "Looks like a big black rat to me." The PhD zombie spoke up, his tone sharp and direct. "What are you doing here?" "I've got something important to report to Ethan," Little Shadow explained. As soon as he said that, the surrounding zombies parted, clearing a path. Ethan appeared, his white shirt practically glowing in the darkness. "What's the matter?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but commanding. "Boss, I found out something big today," Little Shadow exclaimed, his tone exaggerated. "Genesis Biotech is sending food to Serpentize territory, boxes and boxes of it. At least 10 crates, all packed with meat." As he spoke, he couldn't help but drool. It was so bad that it practically turned into a little waterfall, making his words come out garbled. "Calm down first." Ethan frowned, clearly unimpressed by Little Shadow's lack of composure. Right. Little Shadow nodded furiously, wiping his mouth before continuing. "And Serpentize troops are gathering. They're definitely planning to make a move against you." "What? They dare to go after the boss?" Bulldozer roared, his anger erupting like a volcano. That slimy snake must have lost his mind. The elite zombies behind him growled in agreement, their loyalty to Ethan unwavering. To them, Ethan wasn't just a leader. He was their faith, their reason for fighting. They were ready to charge out right now and tear Serpentize forces to shreds. Ethan, however, remained calm. "What kind of lineup are we talking about?" he asked. Serpent himself, along with his 2 top lieutenants, Michelin and the Spider Zombie Woman. He's got 30,000 zombies under his command, with at least 2,000 elites. Plus, he's got a whole bunch of mutant snake beasts. There's no shortage of those, that's for sure. That's quite a lot. Even Bulldozer, with his limited intelligence, could understand the situation. Ethan's territory currently had about 10,000 zombies. Thanks to Ethan's recent efforts, many had evolved, and there were now nearly 3,000 elites among them. Of those, 500 were part of the X-Virus-enhanced elite corps. But in terms of sheer numbers, they were still outmatched. Serpent Eye is working with Genesis Biotech. When the time comes, Genesis Biotech will definitely step in, and their strength isn't something to scoff at. Plus, Little Shadow paused for dramatic effect before continuing. Serpent Eye has evolved into an A-rank zombie king. He's awakened the ability Phantom Realm. It's creepy, powerful, and downright terrifying. Enjoy more content from Empire. Bulldozer snorted, clearly unimpressed. How strong can he really be? Why are you hyping him up like this? I'm not hyping him up. I'm just telling the truth, because I've fought him before. Bulldozer froze, momentarily speechless at Little Shadow's blunt honesty. If this guy was admitting he got his butt kicked, then Serpent Eye must really be a tough opponent. The zombies around them exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just any enemy. They were dealing with someone 2 levels stronger than the red-faced zombie king they'd fought before. All eyes turned to Ethan, waiting for his decision. No matter what he said, they were ready to follow him, even if it meant charging into hell itself. Ethan stood silent for a moment, deep in thought. Then, his voice cut through the tension like a blade. Tomorrow, we'll wipe them out. Roar! The zombies erupted in a deafening cheer, their bloodlust ignited. Laura's lips curled into a grin so wide it nearly reached her ears, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs. She thought to herself, that's our boss. His decisions never disappoint. The territory had been too quiet for too long. A good, bloody battle was exactly what they needed. Bulldozer, too, was fired up. He felt a personal stake in this fight. After all, the grudge with Serpent Eye had started because of him. Tomorrow, we'll crush them. Little Shadow glanced around at the zombies, their fighting spirit burning like wildfire. He couldn't help but feel a pang of awe. Ethan's crew was far stronger than he'd imagined. Tomorrow's battle was going to be brutal. After the decision was made, the zombies dispersed to prepare. Through some quick negotiations, Little Shadow agreed to bring his 5,000 subordinates, including 1,000 elites, to join the fight. Serpent Eye will never see this coming, Little Shadow thought with a smirk. He's in for a nasty surprise. But Ethan wasn't done yet. He had another surprise in mind. Back in his room, he sat on the couch and sent a message to Mia. I've got a huge opportunity for you. Mia's reply came quickly. Oh, what kind of opportunity? Tomorrow, you can come kill zombies. There was a long pause. Ethan stared at his phone, waiting for a response. Mia, on the other hand, was sitting there, completely dumbfounded. Kill zombies? That's your idea of a huge opportunity? In this world, zombies were everywhere. They weren't exactly a rare commodity. Before she could reply, Ethan sent another message. We're hunting an A-rank zombie king tomorrow, Serpent Eye. You can raid his territory for supplies while we're at it. That caught Mia's attention. She knew about Serpent Eye. His territory was rumored to hold valuable resources. A while back, a small team had discovered a stash of preserved crop seeds there. But before they could retrieve them, Serpent Eye's forces wiped them out. No one had dared to try again since. Crop seeds were a rare and precious resource for humans. That could work, Mia replied, explaining her interest in the seeds. Ethan had no objections. Go ahead, bring your team, and take whatever you need. If anything happens, I'll step in. With that, the two finalized their plan. Ethan put his phone away and stood by the window. It was already past midnight, the darkest hour of the night. Outside, the endless growls and roars of zombies echoed through the streets, a constant reminder of the world they lived in. The next day, thick clouds blanketed the sky, blocking out the sun. The air was heavy and gray. No wind, no rain, no light. Caw, caw, caw. A few black crows screeched as they darted across the sky, their shadows flitting over the desolate streets below. On the ground, chaos reigned. Broken buildings and debris littered the streets, a grim reminder of the world's collapse. At the edge of Ethan's territory, a massive force had gathered. Ethan stood at the front, flanked by his 3 trusted generals. Behind them stretched a horde of 10,000 zombies, packed so tightly together that they seemed to stretch on forever. Their grotesque faces radiated bloodlust, their excitement palpable. This was Ethan's army. They had marched to the border of Serpent Eye's territory. Just a short distance ahead lay the enemy's domain. The zombies waited, tense and ready, for Ethan's command. One word from him, and they would charge forward, tearing through Serpent Eye's forces like a tidal wave of death. But Ethan raised a hand, signaling them to hold. Stay here. I'll go ahead and take a look first. Ethan took a few steps forward, his figure gradually fading until he completely disappeared. He had entered stealth mode, and stepped into the territory of the Serpent-Eye Zombie King. His main goal was to scout the area. Besides, Mia hadn't arrived yet, and he had no idea where she was. He figured he'd have to drag her into doing something productive once she showed up. The buildings on either side of the street were in ruins, crumbling and desolate. Dried bloodstains and decayed skeletons littered the ground, while a few zombies shuffled aimlessly, their stiff movements devoid of purpose. These zombies were the weakest of the weak, old, sick, and falling apart. Their bodies were severely decomposed, reeking of rot, with maggots wriggling in their flesh. They were disgusting to look at, the kind of creatures that could make anyone gag. Their combat ability posed a threat only to ordinary humans. They were little more than walking corpses. Of course, there was one exception, a slightly evolved zombie. It sat by the side of the street, clutching a large rat in its hands, gnawing on it with blood dripping from its mouth. Its face was smeared with gore, and rat fur clung to its lips. Further ahead, near the base of a crumbling wall, lay a corpse. Several small snakes slithered in and out of its rotting flesh, turning the body into their personal playground. Disgusting, Ethan muttered, wrinkling his nose. He found the Serpent-Eye Zombie King's territory to be utterly unsanitary. It was filthy like a pigsty. To make matters worse, between the buildings, countless spider webs hung in the air. They were thick with trapped insects, and even a few mutated sparrows were caught in the sticky threads. The birds struggled desperately, causing the webs to tremble, but they couldn't break free. The overlapping webs formed a dense, chaotic mess. Just looking at them was enough to trigger anyone's fear of clusters or tight spaces. Ethan ignored the mess and casually pulled out his phone to text Mia. "Where are you?" "Farmer's market." "You? Almost there. All right, we'll talk when we meet." "I'm busy right now." Mia sent the reply with one hand while slicing through a zombie with her other. She slipped her phone back in her pocket and kept moving. Around her were more than a dozen people, all engaged in combat with zombies. Among them were her partner, Sean, and Chris's group from last time. They were here to help transport supplies. Sean glanced at Mia with admiration in his eyes. "You can text with one hand while fighting zombies? That's impressive." "It's just practice," Mia replied casually. She gripped her blade with both hands and decapitated another zombie in one swift motion. Sean nodded thoughtfully, as if her words had struck a chord. It reminded him of his years of driving. He'd never really paid attention to how the wheels turned, yet he could reverse into a parking spot with pinpoint accuracy every time. Why? Because practice made perfect. He also recalled something his school coach used to say, "With enough effort, water can carve through stone, and a rope can saw through wood." Keep practicing, and even the hardest tasks will become second nature. Yeah, practice really was the key. Behind them, Chris and his group wielded alloy blades, cutting down zombies with ease. These were low-level zombies, the kind that could be dealt with in just a few strikes. There wasn't much pressure. It was more like routine cleanup. They were clearing the area of zombies to make it easier to transport supplies later. Nearby stood the farmer's market. Its rolling shutter door was half open, smeared with bloodstains. The marks of human fingernails clawing at the metal were still faintly visible. The door was rusted shut. Mia stepped forward, gripping her blade with both hands. With a single swing, there was a sharp swish. The door was sliced cleanly in two, as if it were warm butter under a hot knife. Mia, as the first ever Awakener 001, wielded a custom-made weapon, a tachi. The blade and hilt were both unusually long, nearly matching her height. Embedded in the hilt was a lightning element crystal core, faintly crackling with electricity. When fully activated, the electric energy would envelop the sleek blade, enhancing both its speed and destructive power. This was the latest tech developed by the Shelter, Crystal Core Armaments. At the moment, Mia's weapon was one of a kind, and it looked awesome. I mean, who could say no to a glowing sword? With the long blade resting casually on her shoulder, Mia strode straight into the farmer's market. The place was dimly lit, the air thick with the stench of rot. From the darker corners, Faint zombie growls echoed ominously. Behind her, Chris rummaged through his backpack, pulling out a grenade. He lobbed it forward with a strong throw. This wasn't just any grenade. It had a flashing red light. After rolling a couple times on the ground, it started emitting a sharp, rhythmic beeping. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was piercing, cutting through the silence and spreading across the entire market. Raph! The zombies, drawn by the noise, began shambling toward the grenade en masse. As the red light on the grenade blinked faster and the beeping grew more frantic, the tension in the air spiked. Beep, 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 boom. The explosion erupted with a deafening roar, a burst of blinding fire swallowing the horde of zombies. Chunks of flesh and shattered limbs rained down, accompanied by rising smoke and the acrid stench of charred meat. Problem solved, Chris said smugly. The shelter had been developing all kinds of anti-zombie weapons lately, and they were proving to be pretty effective, though for now, they only worked on low-level zombies. With the immediate threat cleared, the group headed straight for the seed storage warehouse. The journey was surprisingly smooth. It seemed the grenade had done its job. They didn't encounter any more zombies along the way. Before long, they reached a room. Even in the dim light, they could make out stacks of large crates piled up ahead. We hit the jackpot. Let's see if there's anything good in here, one of the younger guys said, his face lighting up with excitement. He rushed forward, eager to check out the supplies. Grabbing the lid of one of the crates, he yanked it open with a flourish. But instead of seeds, he was met with a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at him. A snake. Its sharp fangs glistened as it flicked its tongue, hissing menacingly. For a moment, the two locked eyes. Oh crap. The young man's face went pale as he realized what he was looking at. He tried to back away, but it was too late. Whoosh! The snake lunged, sinking its fangs into his neck. The sharp, searing pain made him cry out in agony. The others froze, equally horrified. A snake! Mia reacted instantly. With a swift motion, she swung her blade straight at the snake's head. The razor-sharp edge sliced through the air with precision, so close to the young man's skin that it shaved the fine hairs on his neck. The snake's head was severed cleanly, its body dropping lifelessly to the ground. The young man stumbled back, clutching his neck. His face was pale, his breath ragged. He looked like he just brushed shoulders with death itself. But the burning pain in his neck brought him back to reality. When he pulled his hand away, it was smeared with dark, blackened blood. It's venomous. Of course it's dangerous. The last search team that came here was wiped out. Stay alert, Chris warned, his voice tense. As if on cue, a faint rustling sound began to spread through the warehouse. From beneath the crates and through the cracks, countless black snakes began slithering out, surrounding the group. There's something primal about the human fear of snakes, something buried deep in our DNA. Continue reading stories on Empire. Seeing the writhing mass of serpents, everyone felt their skin crawl. Kill them. As a few snakes slithered closer, Mia didn't hesitate. She swung her blade, slicing them cleanly in half. The others quickly grabbed their weapons, joining the fight against the swarm. But then, a new sound came from above, a faint, unsettling squirming. Chris glanced up and froze in terror. The ceiling beams were covered in snakes. Dozens, maybe hundreds, coiled together in writhing masses. And now, they were starting to drop. It was like a rainstorm of snakes falling straight toward them. The group was gripped with fear. They frantically swung the hunting knives strapped to their waists, slashing at the rain of snakes. It was like a real-life version of Fruit Ninja. Their blades moved so fast they almost sparked, leaving them no time to stop. Before long, the ground was piled high with snake corpses, layer upon layer. Blood sprayed through the air like a wild, chaotic dance. But the snakes seemed endless, continuing to fall relentlessly from above. Everyone's stamina was draining fast, especially the young man who had been bitten earlier. His name was Brandon Hunter. His face had grown pale, his breathing labored. If the venom wasn't sucked out soon, he'd be doomed to die under this rain of snakes. What do we do now? The others weren't faring much better. They had managed to kill hundreds of snakes, but one slip-up could mean certain death. This place is insane. No human should ever set foot here. Just as despair began to set in, something unexpected happened. The snakes suddenly froze mid-air, as if paralyzed. Then, one after another, they exploded with loud bangs, sending chunks of flesh flying everywhere. Blood mist filled the air, turning the scene into something straight out of a nightmare. In just a few seconds, the once overwhelming swarm of snakes had been almost entirely wiped out. The few that survived slithered away in panic, as if they'd encountered something utterly terrifying. What just happened? Chris and the others stopped in their tracks, stunned. They stared blankly at the carnage around them, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Then, a tall figure slowly emerged from the blood-soaked haze. Despite the rain of blood, his white shirt remained spotless, as if untouched by the chaos. It was Ethan. His domain of the dead now covered a massive area, easily suppressing the entire swarm of snakes in an instant. When Sean saw the figure, his eyes lit up with joy. "Ethan, you came to help us." "Yeah." Ethan nodded calmly. The group finally realized that the newcomer was an ally, and an incredibly powerful one at that. Relief washed over them. Brandon, in particular, felt like he had just escaped death itself. His face was filled with gratitude. "Thank you for saving me." "No need to thank me," Ethan replied with a faint smile. His handsome face softened, radiating a warmth that felt like a gentle spring breeze. "Your next chapter awaits on Empire." He was too kind. The group couldn't help but stare at him, momentarily dazed. But Chris, looking at Ethan's smile, felt a chill run down his spine. His body tensed involuntarily. He had encountered Ethan once before during a mission with Mia and knew exactly who, or rather what, he was. Ethan wasn't just any ordinary person. He was the absolute ruler of the skyscraper zone, a phantom infected, and the terrifying king of the undead. He's actually here. Still, Chris knew Ethan wasn't hostile. In fact, he had just saved their lives. Fear aside, Chris couldn't help but feel deeply grateful. "Uncle Chris, can you, suck the venom out for me?" Brandon suddenly asked, breaking the tension. Sure." Chris snapped out of his thoughts and looked at Brandon's neck. The blackened blood was still oozing from a wound. If Brandon weren't an awakener with a superhuman physique, he'd already be dead. But the sight of the wound was unsettling. It made Chris hesitate. Still, with Brandon's life on the line, Chris gritted his teeth and leaned in, pressing his mouth to the side of Brandon's neck to suck out the venom. The two of them ended up in an awkwardly close position, their posture unintentionally suggestive. Meanwhile, Mia's large eyes were fixed on Ethan. She suddenly remembered something. "That list of Black Hand Legion members you gave me last time. Where did you find it?" "In an underground mall," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "Oh." Mia nodded, her brows furrowing slightly. She had noticed before that Ryan seemed to have ulterior motives toward Ethan, but she hadn't realized he was connected to the Black Hand Legion. This deal was a loss. She muttered under her breath. "Don't be so stingy," Ethan said casually, though his gaze had shifted to the Tachi sword in Mia's hand. Its sleek, unique design caught his eye. The rest of the group began searching through the surrounding crates. Most of them had been destroyed by the pythons, but a few still contained seeds that were surprisingly intact. These seeds looked viable, likely still capable of growing crops. Finding these supplies filled everyone with joy. Well, everyone except Chris and Brandon, who were still huddled together as Chris sucked out the venom. Chris spat out several mouthfuls of blackened blood before finally finishing the job. His lips were swollen to the point they looked like two sausages hanging off his face. "That should do it," Chris muttered, exhausted. "Thanks, Uncle Chris," Brandon said gratefully. The two of them slumped against the wall, sitting down to rest. The ordeal had drained them both, especially Brandon. His face was still pale, and his body trembled slightly. He couldn't help but feel lucky to have survived. Honestly, it was a miracle he was still alive. With shaky hands, Brandon pulled out his phone to send a message, letting someone know he was okay. Chris, sitting beside him, glanced over curiously. "Who are you texting?" "My online girlfriend," Brandon replied, his face lighting up with happiness. We haven't met in person yet, but I've seen her photos. She's got fair skin, gorgeous looks, and leg for days. Oh, Chris raised an eyebrow, his expression turning thoughtful. Brandon, you'd better be careful, Chris said seriously. What if she's actually someone from the Black Hand Legion trying to scam you? No way. Brandon's smile faltered. Why not? These days, it's not just humans you have to worry about. Even monsters have evolved intelligence. They can use the internet to trick people too. Who knows if the person you're chatting with is human or something else entirely? Chris said, his tone dead serious. Brandon's face turned pale at the thought. He realized Chris might have a point. The internet was full of all kinds of shady characters, and now, even monsters. It was better to be cautious. So what should I do? Brandon asked nervously. Listen to me, Brandon. The internet is a deep, dark place, and you're not equipped to handle it. Why don't you just give me your phone? I'll chat with her for you, Chris said, his face completely straight. Meanwhile, the commotion they had caused earlier had already drawn the attention of Serpent Eye and his zombie forces. Boss, someone's entered our territory. They're in the farmer's market, a zombie reported. Humans? Serpent Eye raised an eyebrow, glancing over his shoulder. Behind him stood a massive horde of zombies, tens of thousands strong, including elite fighters. He had been preparing to launch an attack on Ethan, but now, at this critical moment, humans had wandered into his domain. A cruel smile spread across Serpent Eye's face. They've practically delivered themselves to us as strategic resources. Zombies were at their strongest, right after consuming fresh flesh. Their cells became hyperactive, enhancing their physical strength, speed, and reflexes to peak levels. Let's go. We'll deal with those humans first. It's on the way anyway, Serpent Eye ordered. With that, the zombie horde began to move. The ground trembled under their sheer numbers, their advance like an unstoppable tidal wave. Among them were grotesque elites, including the massive, bloated Michelin and the arrogant spider zombie woman. Back on Ethan's side, the group had finished resting and were ready to move out. Chris and the others, now carrying the seeds they had salvaged, exited the farmer's market. The area was eerily quiet, the silence oppressive. The zombies in the vicinity had already been cleared out, leaving behind a dead, desolate atmosphere. Let's keep it up, everyone. We're halfway through the plan. With all these seeds, the shelter will definitely reward us, Chris said, trying to motivate the group. Brandon nodded, quickening his pace. He couldn't wait to leave this hellhole behind. Stop! Ethan's calm voice suddenly rang out from behind them. Huh? Brandon froze, turning around with a puzzled expression. What's wrong? There's something in front of you, Ethan said, his tone steady. Brandon frowned in confusion and looked ahead. At first, he didn't see anything unusual, but as he squinted, he noticed something glinting faintly in the sunlight. A thin thread stretched across his path. It was a strand of spider silk. Though nearly invisible, it was incredibly tough and razor-sharp, easily as deadly as any weapon. If Brandon had taken another step, he would have been decapitated on the spot. His heart pounded as he realized just how close he had come to death. The deadly thread was less than 2 inches from his neck. If he took even one more step forward, he'd be dead. No question about it. As their eyes scanned further down the street, they realized the spider silk wasn't just in one place. It crisscrossed the entire area, like a web of laser beams cutting through the air, stretched across the street in every direction. What the hell is this? The group was shaken to their core. The 5-star corpse nest was far more dangerous than they'd imagined. One wrong move, and they'd be dead. This wasn't a place humans were meant to tread. Read new chapters at Empire. This wasn't here when we came through earlier. When did this happen? Brandon asked, frowning. He was sure they'd walked this exact path before. Ethan's calm gaze fixed on the distance. Because when you came through, they hadn't shown up yet. Who? Chris and the others tensed up, a deep sense of unease creeping over them. Well, I didn't expect you to be so sharp. Suddenly, a sharp, mocking female voice echoed from above. Everyone instinctively looked up. Hanging upside down in midair was a woman. Her lower body wasn't human. It had 8 spider legs, and strands of spider silk stretched from her body to the tops of nearby buildings. In broad daylight, this woman dangled upside down in the middle of the street. Her long hair swayed back and forth, and her pale face bore a chilling, bloodthirsty smile. The scene was nothing short of horrifying. The group froze, their breath catching in their throats. They instinctively took a few steps back. "It's the Spider Empress," Chris stammered, his voice trembling with fear. The Spider Empress was infamous, a former overlord in her own right, known for her brutality. She'd been subdued by the serpent-eyed zombie king and brought under his control. Everyone in the shelter had heard of her, and now here she was. But it wasn't over yet. From all directions, low, guttural growls began to echo. The sound of zombies, dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, rose like a tidal wave, growing louder and louder. A massive horde of zombies began pouring into the street, a dense, endless swarm. Among them, one figure stood out, a grotesquely obese zombie nicknamed Michelin. His bloated body jiggled with every step, and the ground seemed to quake beneath his weight. A zombie horde. Chris and the others turned pale as death. Their faces were drained of all hope. The horde was massive, easily tens of thousands strong. Among them were elite zombies, leaping onto nearby rooftops with terrifying agility. They crouched on all fours, their predatory eyes locked on the group, surrounding them completely. "They're all here," someone muttered. Even Mia, who had seen her fair share of horrors, had never witnessed anything like this. No matter how strong an individual was, there was no way to take on a horde of this size. Even ants, when there are enough of them, can take down an elephant. And these weren't ants, they were zombies. If nothing else, they'd wear you down until you dropped. As the horde surged forward, a towering figure appeared on a high rise in the distance. It was the serpent-eyed zombie king. His massive frame loomed over the battlefield, his piercing yellow eyes scanning the group below. His presence radiated dominance, as if he ruled this entire region. When his gaze fell on them, it felt like a dagger stabbing into their hearts. Even the serpent-eyed zombie king had shown up. He was the undisputed ruler of this area, the apex predator. "Is this really necessary?" Chris muttered bitterly, his face twisted in despair. What had he done to deserve this? Did he ruin the guy's favorite show? Sleep with his girlfriend? All they'd done was come out here to scavenge for seeds. And now, the entire zombie army had mobilized to trap them here. It was absurd. Chris sighed in resignation. "Guess I can't say I didn't deserve this." The group was utterly hopeless. They didn't even have the will to fight back anymore. Some of them were even considering ending their own lives to avoid the agony of being torn apart by zombies. Under the crushing weight of despair, Brandon's trembling hands pulled out his phone. He just sent a message to let his family know he was safe. Now, he was rewriting it as a final goodbye. What a cruel, hopeless world this was. Mia, however, remained calm. She rested her long blade on her shoulder, her sharp eyes fixed on the scene ahead. Her expression didn't waver. "So this is the target?" "Yeah, more or less," Ethan replied, tilting his head slightly as he assessed the situation. "Got it." Mia nodded, shifting her grip to hold her blade with both hands. She raised it in front of her, ready for battle. "Let's do this." "Wait, what?" Chris and the others stared at her in disbelief. She wanted to fight this? The serpent-eyed zombie king's gaze locked onto Ethan. Though he'd never seen him before, he could sense the aura of a fellow apex predator. "I didn't expect to see you reduced to running with prey." "There's a lot you didn't expect," Ethan replied casually, completely unfazed. Serpentine's grin stretched unnaturally wide, reaching all the way to his cheekbones. His piercing yellow eyes narrowed slightly, and a sinister smile crept across his face. Seeing Ethan walk into his territory alone, Serpentine felt victory was already in his grasp. "Looks like I overestimated you. You're actually dumb enough to walk in here and throw your life away. Fine, I'll grant your wish. What exactly do you have to be so smug about?" Ethan's calm voice cut through the tension. The moment he finished speaking, the sky behind him darkened. A massive black cloud surged over the horizon, dense and ominous, blotting out the sun. Caw, caw, caw. Hey, buddy, I'm back. The sharp cries of crows filled the air as they swooped in like fighter jets, their sleek forms cutting through the sky. In an instant, they blanketed the heavens, their sheer numbers creating an overwhelming, oppressive presence. What the hell? Chris and the others gasped, their jaws dropping. What's going on now? But before they could process the scene above, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Shards of broken glass on the street rattled violently, and the earth shook harder and harder, as if an army was charging toward them. Roar! A thunderous bellow echoed from the distance. Bulldozer's massive frame emerged, his hulking body leading a pack of ferocious zombies. Among them were familiar faces, Laura, the Dr. Zombie, and countless others, all charging forward with terrifying speed and ferocity. The zombie horde was here in full force. Chris suddenly realized what was happening. This wasn't just a fight. It was a battle for dominance between zombie kings. He was nothing more than a bystander, a minor character caught in the crossfire. How did he, of all people, end up in the middle of something like this? But as he watched Ethan's forces arrive, a flicker of hope reignited in his heart. If Ethan could defeat Serpent Eye, they might actually survive this. Maybe it was the atmosphere, or maybe it was sheer desperation, but Chris felt a surge of determination. He gripped his alloy blade tightly, his eyes shining with newfound resolve. So you came prepared. Serpent Eye muttered from his perch on the rooftop, his sharp gaze scanning the battlefield. He quickly realized what was happening, but it didn't faze him. He was ready for a fight to the death. 3,000 against 1,000, he sneered. The advantage is mine. Kill them all. Serpent Eye roared. At his command, his zombie horde erupted into a frenzy, surging forward like a tidal wave. The two zombie armies collided with the force of a raging storm. It was chaos. Zombies clawed, bit, and tore into each other with reckless abandon. Blood sprayed through the air, and the stench of death and gore filled the battlefield. The zombies fought like rabid animals, driven by an insatiable hunger to rip flesh from their enemies. Amid the chaos, a group of zombies stood out. Ethan's elite force of 500 was like a spearhead, cutting through the enemy ranks with brutal efficiency. These elite zombies were terrifying. Even when bitten, they didn't flinch. Instead, they grabbed their attacker's head, rip it clean off, and toss it aside like garbage. Their wounds healed almost instantly, the torn flesh knitting itself back together before anyone could react. The enemy zombies fell one after another, but Ethan's elite soldiers were unstoppable, charging forward like invincible war machines, leaving destruction in their wake. What the hell are these monsters? Serpent Eye muttered, narrowing his eyes as he watched the carnage unfold. For the first time, a sense of unease crept into his mind. These weren't ordinary zombies. There was something far worse. And then there was Laura. Her lithe figure darted through the battlefield like a shadow, her face twisted into a chilling smile. Wherever she went, bodies piled up in her wake. She was a one-woman slaughterhouse, cutting down everything in her path. Stop her! Serpent Eye barked. Michelin, the grotesquely obese zombie, lumbered forward like a wrecking ball. His massive body barreled through the battlefield, sending zombies flying in every direction as he charged toward Laura. But before he could reach her, a massive fist slammed into his face. His flabby body rippled like a wave from the impact. Bulldozer stepped into view, towering over Michelin. Hey, fatso! Bulldozer growled, cracking his knuckles. Your fight's with me. Roar! Michelin staggered back 2 steps, letting out an enraged roar. He was completely provoked now, swinging his fist straight at Bulldozer. The two of them were evenly matched, both brute force tanks like humanoid beasts, trading blow after blow with raw, bone-crushing power. Damn, they're intense. Serpent Eye observed the chaos from a distance, quickly realizing that the enemy's evolution level was off the charts. Their strength was overwhelming, and as soon as the fight began, his side was already at a disadvantage. But Ethan had 2 powerful allies on his side. Mia had transformed into a cold, emotionless killing machine. Her face was calm, devoid of any expression, as she wielded her 40-foot-long tachi with deadly precision. The blade cut through the air with a fierce whoosh, and wherever it passed, zombies were shredded into pieces. Black blood and mangled limbs flew everywhere. She was like a walking meat grinder on the battlefield. Sean, on the other hand, was brimming with excitement. It was his first time experiencing such a massive battle, and he seemed to be feeding off the adrenaline. With a single punch, he sent a zombie flying dozens of feet away. Bang, 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 bang. With every punch he threw, zombies were launched into the air. Some crashed into storefronts along the street, while others smashed into their undead comrades, scattering them like bowling pins. Meanwhile, Chris and the others in the rear were fighting seriously as well. They were all awakeners who had condensed their neurocores, making them as strong as elite zombies. Standing back to back, they formed a tight battle formation, working together seamlessly. Their coordinated attacks packed a serious punch. Everyone knew that if they could help Ethan win this fight, they might actually survive. With their lives on the line, no one dared to slack off. Where the hell is Genesis Biotech? Serpentine muttered to himself, growing increasingly uneasy. If this kept up, he knew he'd lose sooner or later. Screw it. With a leap, Serpentine jumped straight off the high-rise building, deciding to join the fray himself. If he didn't step in now, all his underlings would be wiped out. But the moment he landed, an overwhelming pressure crashed down on him. It felt like a tidal wave of blood, suffocating and inescapable, as if he were sinking into quicksand. What's the matter? Couldn't hold back anymore. Ethan's figure appeared in front of him. Oomph. Serpentine let out a cold snort, his vicious eyes gleaming with malice. The only reason you're winning is because you've got humans helping you. Didn't you just say I was hanging out with my food? Ethan's lips curled into a faint smirk. For a moment, Serpent was at a loss for words. The jab hit him hard, and he felt a surge of humiliation and anger. Dying as an A-rank zombie king, Serpentine's body was incredibly tough. Even under the oppressive force of the domain of the dead, he hadn't lost his ability to fight. With a murderous aura radiating from him, he raised his fist and swung it at Ethan. Ethan could sense it, whether human or zombie. Serpentine was the strongest opponent he'd faced so far. But he didn't dodge. Instead, he met the attack head-on, throwing his own punch to clash with Serpentine's. Boom! The collision of the two zombie kings was like two mountains crashing into each other. A shock wave erupted from their fists, sending nearby zombies flying into the air. Continue reading at Empire. Serpentine felt a sharp pain shoot through his arm and couldn't stop himself from stumbling back several steps. Under the suppression of the domain of the dead, he was no match for Ethan. You've evolved to this level. Serpentine was horrified to realize the massive gap between their strength. Ethan's voice was calm. Not bad. You're the first opponent to take one of my punches. You? Serpentine's eyes burned with rage. Ethan's tone was so arrogant, so dismissive. It was infuriating. It felt like a blatant insult, and his anger boiled over. But before he could react, Ethan closed the distance again. The oppressive force of the domain of the dead surged forward, and Ethan's 5 fingers reached for Serpentine's head. Serpentine bared his fangs, his yellow pupils narrowing sharply. His mental energy flared wildly as he activated his awakened ability, Phantom Realm. Ethan raised an eyebrow as the world around him suddenly fell silent. The roars and howls of zombies vanished, and he found himself standing in a pitch-black void. It was as if he were floating in an endless, silent universe. The next moment, deep within the darkness ahead, something seemed to writhe and shift. Slowly, an unimaginably massive serpent emerged. Its body stretched for miles, its raised head as large as a celestial body, and its vicious eyes locked onto Ethan. Then, one after another, more colossal serpents appeared, each raising their heads high, encircling Ethan completely. The serpents loomed like gods, gazing down at all life with disdain, their overwhelming presence suffocating the air. Ethan felt as though he were trapped beneath several towering mountains. Compared to these creatures, he was like a speck of dust in a vast ocean. The oppressive aura pressed down on him relentlessly. For most people, such a terrifying sight would have been enough to shatter their sanity. But Ethan's expression remained calm. He even couldn't help but mutter under his breath, "This illusion is so fake." He had been warned about this. Little Shadow had already told him that Serpentine's ability was Phantom Realm, so he was mentally prepared. Faced with the monstrous serpents, Ethan felt no fear. Instead, he simply closed his eyes. If it was all fake, why bother looking at it? Ethan shifted all his focus to his senses. Moments later, he pinpointed Serpentine's presence. Behind me, without hesitation, Ethan swung his fist backward. It seemed to strike empty air, but a muffled sound echoed, followed by the sharp crack of bones breaking. Serpentine's figure was sent flying, and at the same time, the entire illusion shattered like broken glass. Ethan was back on the battlefield. Serpentine was hurled 500 feet away, smashing through several walls before finally coming to a stop. This is impossible. His mind was reeling with shock. Ethan had clearly been trapped in the illusion, yet he still managed to land a direct hit. Serpentine's Phantom Realm was undeniably powerful. Even a B-rank Awakener caught in it would collapse in terror. But against Ethan, it just seemed laughably ineffective. As Serpentine struggled to climb out of the rubble, he turned his head and saw Ethan walking toward him again. The aura around Ethan was like a surging sea of blood, radiating an overwhelming pressure that was about to engulf Serpentine completely. A chilling sense of doom washed over him. It was as if he could see death itself approaching. But just then, the sound of gunfire erupted from the distant street. Two towering Doom Hunters appeared first, their Gatling guns spitting fire as shell casings rained down. They were clearing a path ahead with relentless firepower. Behind them, two rows of armored vehicles advanced slowly, providing cover. In the center of the convoy, a group of human Awakeners emerged, led by none other than Justin. He was at the head of the squad, exuding confidence. The Awakeners were clad in sleek black nano-combat suits, giving them an imposing and stylish appearance. "Let's see how the fight's going," Justin said with a smug grin. In truth, he had deliberately arrived late. He wasn't truly allied with Serpentine and had hoped that the Zombie King and Ethan would wear each other down, leaving him to swoop in and reap the rewards. Just like when Ethan had taken down the Operation King Hunt squad. His ideal scenario? The battle would end with both Ethan and Serpentine severely weakened. Then he could eliminate Serpentine as well. A mere zombie thinks it can outsmart me? Doesn't it know that humans are masters of strategy? Justin muttered to himself, his hand steady now as he flicked open a lighter. He lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, and exhaled with satisfaction. He had completely forgotten how terrified he'd been back in Serpentine's lair, trembling like a leaf. Now, he was acting like a petty man drunk on his own success. From his vantage point, the battlefield was utter chaos. Everywhere he looked, there was carnage, zombies and humans locked in brutal combat. He couldn't even tell which zombies were on the same side. All he knew was that the fighting was fierce and bloody. Where's little Serpentine gone? Someone from Genesis Biotech is here. Serpentine glanced over, his eyes narrowing as a thought crossed his mind. In an instant, countless serpents surged out from the darkness behind him. The snakes hissed and screeched as they lunged toward Ethan, but before they could get close, they exploded one by one. Shards of flesh and splattered blood filled the air, obscuring the view. Taking advantage of the chaos, Serpentine turned and bolted, heading straight for the Genesis Biotech camp at an incredible speed. His plan was simple: redirect the disaster toward someone else. Justin, who had been observing the battlefield, suddenly noticed a tall figure sprinting toward him. The man looked panicked and utterly disheveled. "Your journey continues on Empire." "Whoa, you got wrecked, huh?" Justin remarked, sizing up Serpentine. The once imposing figure was now covered in dust and grime, his chest visibly caved in as if he'd taken a massive hit. Not bad, not bad. Justin smirked inwardly. His plan was working perfectly. If even Serpent Eye, an A-rank zombie king, had been beaten to this state, then Ethan must be in rough shape too. Once both sides were worn out, Justin could swoop in and clean up the mess. But he didn't let his thoughts show. Instead, he put on a concerned expression and asked, "Bro Serpent Eye, you're hurt. What about the zombie king in that building? How's he holding up?" "They're strong. Way too strong. We're no match for them. Thank God you showed up when you did. Hurry, take them down," Serpent Eye urged, his voice filled with urgency. "Huh?" Justin frowned, sensing something was off. He scanned the battlefield carefully and asked, "Wait a second. Those guys getting their asses kicked over there, don't tell me they're your men?" "Not all of them, but yeah, most of them," Serpent Eye admitted. "Are you kidding me?" Justin nearly choked on his own spit. "And the zombie king in the building?" Justin pressed. "There." Serpent Eye tilted his head toward the battlefield. Justin followed his gaze and froze. Amid the chaos, a tall, slender figure strolled casually through the battlefield. His white shirt was pristine, untouched by dirt or blood. Not a single scratch marred his body. Fuck! Justin cursed internally. This Serpent Eye was utterly useless. The guy had gotten himself beaten to a pulp, while Ethan looked like he'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. So much for playing the waiting game. There'd be no easy win here. Ethan, meanwhile, had noticed Serpent Eye retreating toward the Genesis biotech camp. The camp was guarded by over 20 Awakeners, but Ethan didn't rush. Instead, he walked toward them at a steady, unhurried pace. "He's coming. He's coming." The tension in the camp skyrocketed as everyone's eyes locked on Ethan. As he approached, several elite zombies broke away from the main group and charged toward the human camp, their ferocity palpable. "Attack!" Justin barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The Awakeners behind him sprang into action. Energy surged as elemental powers came to life. Walls of earth and ice rose to block the zombies, while fireballs and ice spears rained down in rapid succession. The coordination was seamless, a testament to their training. Among them was a woman clad in a sleek black nanocombat suit that accentuated her athletic figure. Her hair was tied back in a high ponytail, giving her a sharp, no-nonsense look. Her name was Marina Drake, a Water Element Awakener and one of the captains of Operation King Hunt. Her reputation as a powerhouse was well-earned. With a wave of her hand, a surge of blue energy coalesced into a roaring water dragon. It tore through the horde of zombies, scattering them like leaves in a storm. "Humans do have some fight in them," Serpent Eye muttered under his breath. The elite zombies were being handled by the Awakeners, while the regular ones were left to the Doom Hunters. The Doom Hunters were relentless. Their Gatling guns roared, spitting out streams of bullets that shredded the zombies into unrecognizable chunks. If any zombie managed to get close, the Doom Hunters would swing their massive iron hammers, smashing their enemies into bloody pulp with a single blow. "There's hope," Serpent Eye thought, a flicker of optimism lighting up his battered spirit. For the first time, he felt like victory might actually be within reach. Just then, a shadowy figure, silent as a ghost, slipped into the battlefield unnoticed. It crept around to the rear of the Genesis biotech camp and merged seamlessly with the shadow of one of the Awakeners on the ground. The figure, known as Shadow, moved without a sound, an assassin born of darkness. From the shadow of the unsuspecting Awakener, Shadow's semi-ethereal body began to rise, flickering like black flames as it took form. A psychic-type Awakener nearby suddenly sensed something amiss. He instinctively turned his head, his eyes widening in horror. "Jennifer, behind you!" he shouted in alarm. "What?" Jennifer, the Awakener in question, looked confused. She began to turn, but before she could fully react, a sharp, searing pain tore through her body. Squelch! Shadow's clawed hand had already pierced through her back. Jennifer's body convulsed violently as blood gushed from the wound. Her eyes widened in shock, but within moments, her life slipped away. Her lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Hee! Shadow let out a sinister laugh, licking the blood off his claws with a twisted expression of satisfaction. For someone like him, who had lived in deprivation, this was the sweetest delicacy, a taste of pure ecstasy. The scene sent chills down everyone's spine. "What the hell is that thing?" someone gasped. "Another zombie king? Attack him, now!" The camp erupted into chaos as the Awakeners unleashed their powers, hurling attacks toward Shadow. But Shadow had no intention of sticking around. After his successful ambush, he retreated swiftly, disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, from the street corner behind him, a massive horde of zombies surged forward. This was Shadow's crew, his brothers in poverty. 5,000 zombies, including 1,000 elite ones, charged like starving wolves. Their desperation made them fearless, and the sight of so many humans only fueled their bloodlust. "Damn it, he has backup." Justin realized the gravity of the situation and quickly ordered his forces to intercept the incoming horde. Meanwhile, Serpent Eye recognized Shadow immediately. "So it's you, you pathetic loser. And now you're here to mess things up for me." Serpent Eye snarled. "Serpent Eye, your time is up," Shadow growled in a low, menacing voice. The Awakeners Justin had brought with him were now locked in battle with Shadow's forces. But even as they fought, they couldn't forget the most dangerous threat of all, the zombie king, Ethan, who had been walking toward them just moments ago. "Wait!" Justin's brow furrowed as a sense of unease crept over him. He scanned the battlefield frantically, but Ethan's tall, imposing figure was nowhere to be seen. "Ethan's gone." "What?" The others around him were equally shocked. They turned to look, but Ethan had indeed vanished. That didn't make sense. He had been walking toward them just a moment ago. Where could he have gone? But there was no time to dwell on it. Zombies were attacking from all sides, and the humans had no choice but to focus on defending themselves. With the arrival of Shadow and his horde, the battle had reached a fever pitch. Elsewhere on the battlefield, another intense fight was unfolding. The Spider Empress, a former ruler in her own right, was proving to be a formidable force. Her webs shot out in rapid succession, ensnaring zombies and either tearing them apart or immobilizing them. Her webs were thick and sticky, and many of them were covered in crows. The red-eyed crow, however, was having a rough time. It darted and weaved through the webs, narrowly avoiding capture as it tried to escape. "Don't run, my little darling," the Spider Empress called out, her voice dripping with mockery as she pursued the crow relentlessly. "Freak! You're such a freak!" The red-eyed crow squawked in terror, flapping its wings desperately. It was almost out of the web's range and ready to ascend into the sky. But the Spider Empress was its natural predator. With a sharp hiss, she opened her mouth, and a torrent of silk shot out, weaving itself into a massive web above the crow. The crow had nowhere to go. The web fell like a net, trapping it mid-air. With a loud thud, the red-eyed crow crashed to the ground, tangled in the sticky threads. It struggled with all its might, but the web only tightened around it, leaving it completely immobilized. The Spider Empress's eyes gleamed with excitement as she leapt into the air, her 8 razor-sharp legs poised to strike. The red-eyed crow's crimson eyes flickered with panic as the Spider Empress's massive form loomed closer. Death was seconds away. "Shit, this is it for me," the crow thought, despair washing over it. But just as the Spider Empress's legs were about to pierce its body, a massive figure stepped in front of the crow, blocking the attack like an unyielding wall. Squelch! The Spider Empress's sharp legs stabbed into the newcomer's body, leaving several bloody holes. Blood poured from the wounds, but the figure didn't flinch. It was Bulldozer. His massive arms were crossed in front of him, shielding the crow from the fatal blow. Once again, he had been turned into a pincushion. Bulldozer gritted his teeth, enduring the excruciating pain. He turned his head slightly to look at the crow and, through clenched teeth, forced out a few words. "Hey, remember when we first met, and I caught you? Well, now I've saved you. So, We're even now, right? Can we call it quits? The red-eyed crow blinked its crimson eyes, staring at him for a moment. Then it tilted its head and said softly, "You big idiot." Uh, Bulldozer froze for a moment, visibly startled. Why is she still cursing me? Gritting his teeth against the sharp pain, Bulldozer mustered his strength and shoved Spider Empress away with both arms. Spider Empress bared her sharp fangs, her sinister grin spreading wide. Once a dominant force in her own right, she was slightly higher in rank than Bulldozer. Neither of you stands a chance against me. But before her words could fully settle, a figure emerged from the shadows. A young girl carrying a long tachi, sword on her shoulder. The blade's edge gleamed, dripping fresh blood as she walked toward them. Mia's large, calm eyes locked on his Spider Empress. "Let me handle this." "Huh? You're asking to die." Spider Empress's pupils narrowed dangerously. This was supposed to be a battle between zombies, yet this human prey dared to challenge her. What's more, Spider Empress could sense that Mia's aura wasn't particularly strong. Swoosh! Spider Empress opened her mouth and spat out razor-sharp webs, shooting them like arrows toward Mia. Mia swung her tachi in a flurry of precise slashes, cutting through the incoming webs. However, a few strands managed to graze her cheek and shoulder. The sharp threads sliced through her skin, leaving deep cuts that began to bleed. Bulldozer and Red-Eyed Crow stared, wide-eyed. Bulldozer remembered Mia vividly. She had once visited Ethan's territory, the time he had messed up his patrol duties. He still felt guilty about it, so her face was etched in his memory. Plus, the boss had said something important back then. Mia is a friend. Oh no. Boss's friend is leaking, soup. Bulldozer muttered nervously, but Mia's expression remained calm. If anything, she seemed to relish the pain. The sharp, stinging sensation coursing through her body triggered her ability, deadly pain. Sean glanced at him, his sharp eyes gleaming with intelligence. "Oh, you've heard of my legend." But before Justin could respond, Serpent Eye roared in fury. He unleashed a torrent of mental energy, directing it all towards Sean in a desperate attempt to crush him. Sean, however, remained completely unfazed. "As long as I abandon my rational mind, your tricks won't work on me." With that, his body began to crackle and pop as his bones shifted and expanded. In an instant, he activated his fearless berserk state,